All right, AMP1 students, in this last video in chapter 10, we're going to talk about the effects of exercise on our skeletal muscles as well as the effects of aging. All right, so as far as exercise, there's going to be changes in our skeletal muscles based on the exercise that we do. And there's actually, they kind of break exercise down into endurance exercises versus resistance exercises. And so depending on which one you're doing, or if you're doing both, you'll have different changes in your skeletal muscles. So the endurance, they also sometimes call it aerobic exercise. That's kind of like when you're running. Anytime you do some moderate activity that increases your heart rate, they call that aerobic or endurance exercises. And so this mainly, doing that exercise mainly changes things in your skeletal muscle. Doesn't make them bigger, like skeletal muscles bigger, but it just kind of changes how the energy is supplied in those. So if you do endurance or aerobic exercise, you're going to have changes that will allow your skeletal muscles to make more ATP in a more efficient way, so that way your muscles won't get fatigued over time doing those endurance exercises. So like an increase in the number of mitochondria could happen. You'll get an increase in enzymes for using fatty acids. So we have that source of organic molecules to be used for aerobic cellular respiration. And so that helps with preparing your skeletal muscle fibers or cells to handle those longer endurance exercises, be able to provide the ATP needed with little to no fatigue. So that's good for our skeletal muscles. And it's also good because we're increasing our heart rate. So even the heart is cardiac muscle. It does improve the cardiac muscle. It usually makes the cardiac muscle, we get like an increase in the size of those cardiac muscle fibers, and so the heart wall will thicken and it can pump blood a lot better. And then more blood vessels, we actually can generate the production of more blood vessels, so blood vessels can grow into the skeletal muscle, and it's just again providing a way for the skeletal muscle cells or fibers to get more oxygen there, so they can do more aerobic cellular respiration, make more ATP, and be able to handle the endurance or aerobic exercise that you're doing. So that's what you see with the endurance or aerobic exercise. So good things for your body. The other type of exercise is resistance exercise. That's more like weightlifting. And that is where you get more increase in the power and size of your skeletal muscles. So slide this up. So what happens is the more resistance exercise that you do, it stimulates your skeletal muscle fibers to produce more of your proteins, so like your myosin and actin. And if you continue to produce more of those proteins, your skeletal muscle fibers or cells will get larger. So whenever they increase in size, we call that hypertrophy. So that's a term that you should be familiar with because we use it a lot in the medical field. So hypertrophy just means an increase in the size. So whenever you start resistance training, you'll notice that you can visibly see that your biceps brachii is bigger than it used to be, and that's mainly because the size of your muscle cells or fibers that were in there got bigger because they started producing more contractile proteins and other proteins too. And then I won't talk much about hyperplasia. That happens, but it's a little less of a contribution to it. But I will talk about lack of exercise. So just like, exercising improves your ability to make ATP and increases the size of your muscles. You can have a more forcible contraction. The lack of exercise is going to cause the muscle cell fibers to decrease in size. The opposite of hypertrophy then is atrophy. And this is bad because if you have atrophy, it could be temporary. Sometimes that can happen. But if it goes too long, you'll get to the point where you can't reverse it. So if you're not using your skeletal muscles and they atrophy, they can start to die and they won't be replaced. So our skeletal muscles don't have that ability to undergo mitosis and like make new ones. And those usually once they die, then where they were left, they get replaced by connective tissue, and that obviously isn't the proper tissue. That can't cause any sort of contraction and contribute to any muscle force. So that's one reason why physical therapy is very important with people that have injuries where they're going to have some atrophy. The physical therapy area of the medical field helps people to not get to that point where they have irreversible dead and dying muscle fibers that affect their mobility. So, all right. So that was for exercise. So the exercise is good. Not exercising is bad. Or not as healthy. I shouldn't say bad. Just not as healthy. All right, now the effects of aging, which most of you don't have to worry about. But when I read this, it's kind of depressing because I am close to 50. So I'm having these changes, and it is something you can't necessarily avoid. You can kind of slow them down though, which is good. But over time, just like with our bones, we talked about how the bone mass is going to, about mid 20s or 30s start to drop off. So does your skeletal muscle mass. So slow, progressive loss of skeletal muscle mass usually begins in your 30s, more noticeable when you get closer to 50. So you do get some loss of that muscle mass because the skeletal muscles get smaller, so the diameter of them get smaller. But most of it, you're actually, which is the sad part, you actually have a decrease in skeletal muscle fiber numbers. You're actually losing some of those skeletal fiber numbers. And partly it's due to lack of physical activity. All right, so you also have some, when we haven't talked about aging the nervous system, but motor neurons, you'll lose numbers of those as well, which are those are what stimulate our skeletal muscle fibers. So that can lead to our skeletal muscles atrophying and actually dying as well. So you will see as you get older more issues with mobility and being able to do kind of physical tasks and more issues with balance and things like that. So just things to be aware of. And you can, though, as a older person or someone around their 50s, you can try to slow down the progression, though. So that's why exercising is important, both resistance training and endurance. Other things with aging is those little metabolic pathways that produce ATP that we talked about, they also, aren't as efficient anymore. So that will decrease as well, just our ability to produce ATP, which isn't good. And then we talk about this, we talked about it with the skin healing and bone healing, but it's kind of the same way with skeletal muscle healing. There's a reduced capacity to recover, repair from any sort of disease or injury that you may have to your skeletal muscles as well. So, all right, so that is our chapter on skeletal muscles. So we did have, and this kind of we did have some information that you need to know about the nervous system, and we kind of talked about these as we were going through the chapter 10. So make sure you're familiar with the features of the neuron, just the basic ones, and which way the action potential travels, what is synapses, all those things that we, like I said, included in our discussion of skeletal muscle contraction. So I will see you in the next video.